Hello Podcast. This is your guide to actionable insights and strategies for employees and salarymen. In each episode, we cover a variety of topics, from productivity hacks and financial tips to work-life balance and personal growth. Our mission is to equip you with practical tools to enhance your professional journey. Let's dive in and discover the benefits waiting for you in the practical world. This is the real world. This is the Practical World Podcast.
Ever scroll through LinkedIn and suddenly feel like, ugh, I'm just not as successful as everyone else?
Oh, tell me about it.
You know, that feeling of comparison can really hit hard, especially at work.
Yeah.
So we're diving deep into that today.
Okay.
We've got some research about the comparison trap, and we're going to unpack why it's so powerful, how it affects you, and most importantly, how to actually break free from it.
You know, it's fascinating how this seemingly simple feeling of comparing ourselves to others has a real impact, not just emotionally, but on your brain chemistry and even how you perform at work.
Okay, so let's start with the science.
All right.
One of the articles you shared from Nature Neuroscience talked about how comparison actually activates the stress response in the brain. What's going on there?
So when you compare yourself to someone who seems to be doing better than you, your brain can actually interpret that as a threat.
Really?
Yeah. It's almost like an ancient survival mechanism, even though in the modern workplace, we're not facing any real physical danger.
So instead of a saber-toothed tiger, it's seeing a coworker get a promotion or land a big client.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Your brain releases stress hormones like cortisol, and that can actually impair your ability to think clearly, make decisions, and focus on your work.
Wow. So it's not just about feeling bad. It's actually affecting our ability to do our jobs well.
Right.
This reminds me of something else you sent, an article by Dr. Kristen Neff about self-compassion.
Yeah.
She talks about how comparison fuels this negative self-evaluation spiral.
Yeah. And that's where the emotional roller coaster comes in. Instead of feeling inspired by someone else's achievements, we can end up feeling inadequate, resentful, or anxious.
Ugh. It's like when you're trying to be happy for a colleague who got promoted, but secretly you're thinking, why not me?
It's so relatable. And Brené Brown's research on vulnerability and shame adds another layer to this. She highlights how comparison can magnify those feelings of not being good enough. It can make us question our own worth and abilities.
So not only are we dealing with a stressed out brain, but we're also facing this wave of negative emotions. It's no wonder this whole comparison thing could be so draining.
Absolutely. And it's not just an individual problem. It can create a toxic work environment. Think about the concept of social undermining, where colleagues sabotage each other because they're so focused on competing and comparing.
Oh, I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
Instead of working together and supporting each other,
Yeah.
people start trying to one-up each other,
Exactly.
which definitely doesn't lead to a positive or productive atmosphere.
It's like everyone's trying to grab a bigger piece of a pie that's not even that big to begin with. The 2019 Gallup study we included really highlights this connection between comparison competition and burnout.
Makes sense if you're constantly feeling pressured to keep up with everyone else working longer hours, setting unrealistic expectations, and sacrificing self-care. It's bound to lead to burnout.
And that ultimately affects everyone. It creates this culture where people are afraid to take risks or be vulnerable because they're so worried about how they'll be judged or compared to others.
So we've established that comparison is bad for our brains, bad for our emotions, and bad for the workplace. But is there actually a way to break free from this trap? Can we actually stop comparing ourselves to others?
The good news is, yes, you can. It starts with understanding the science and then taking concrete steps to shift your focus and change your mindset. There are some really effective strategies we'll explore that can help you create a more positive and fulfilling work experience.
Okay, that's what I want to hear. Tell me more about these strategies. How can we start breaking free from this comparison trap and actually enjoy work more?
One of the most powerful things you can do is shift your focus away from needing external validation and instead set goals that are intrinsically motivating to you. This means focusing on things that you find personally meaningful and rewarding, rather than chasing after what others have or what you think you should be doing.
So instead of feeling envious of a colleague's promotion, I might focus on becoming really skilled at a particular aspect of my job that I find interesting and challenging.
Exactly. And here's why it works. When you achieve a goal that is intrinsically motivating, your brain releases dopamine, which is associated with pleasure and reward. So you're rewarding yourself from within rather than relying on external validation to feel good.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like finding satisfaction in the journey itself, rather than constantly looking over your shoulder to see how you measure up to others.
Now, I know you might be thinking, but what about looking up to people who are more successful? Isn't that a form of comparison? And you're right, it can be, but there's a way to make it work for you instead of against you.
So there's a right way and a wrong way to do upward comparison.
Absolutely. If you're constantly comparing yourself to someone you admire and feeling inadequate, that's obviously not helpful. But you can shift this into a positive by using it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Instead of envying someone's success, think about what you can learn from their journey. Seek mentorship, ask for advice, and understand how they got to where they are.
So instead of seeing them as competition, see them as a source of inspiration and guidance.
Exactly. It's about shifting your mindset from I'll never be as good as them to what can I learn from their experience? This kind of constructive comparison can be incredibly motivating and even help you build valuable connections.
I love that. It turns comparison into collaboration, which is so much healthier for everyone involved. And speaking of healthy habits,
Mindfulness can be a really powerful tool for breaking free from comparison. Practices like focused breathing or short meditation sessions can help you train your brain to stay present.
I've tried meditation before, but sometimes it feels like I'm just sitting there thinking about all the things I need to do.
I hear you, it takes practice. But the key is that when you're focused on the here and now, you're less likely to get caught in those mental loops of comparing yourself to others.
So it's like hitting the pause button on those thoughts and giving your brain a break.
Exactly. The Harvard Business Review research you shared shows that even short mindfulness sessions can improve concentration and reduce work-related stress. It's like giving your brain a mini vacation from the comparison game.
That sounds amazing. And since we're on the topic of giving ourselves a break, let's talk about self-compassion. I think a lot of people, myself included, struggle with being way harder on themselves than they would ever be on a friend.
You're definitely not alone. Many people are incredibly self-critical, especially in the workplace. But self-compassion is essential for breaking free from the comparison trap. It's about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a friend who is struggling.
So instead of beating myself up for every mistake or setback, I should approach myself with a gentler, more supportive attitude.
Exactly. And this doesn't mean making excuses for yourself or ignoring areas where you need to improve. It's about recognizing that everyone makes mistakes, and it's how we respond to those mistakes that matters.
So it's about learning from our experiences, both the good and the bad, and using those learnings to move forward.
Precisely. Dr. Neff's research shows that self-compassion can actually promote resilience, emotional stability, and even job satisfaction.
So being kind to ourselves isn't just a nice idea. It can actually make us better employees. Do you have any tips for how to practice self-compassion?
Absolutely. A simple exercise you can try is listing 3 things you appreciate about your work or your skills. It's a quick way to shift your brain towards self-support rather than self-criticism.
I like that. It's like a little gratitude boost for the workday.
Yeah.
So far, we've talked about shifting our focus to intrinsic goals, using upward comparison, constructively practicing mindfulness, and cultivating self-compassion. But how do we create a less comparison-driven workplace culture?
That's a great question, and it starts with changing the way we define and reward success. Instead of solely focusing on individual achievements, we need to recognize and celebrate team successes. This fosters a sense of collaboration and shared goals, which reduces the need for that cutthroat competition that often fuels comparison.
So instead of everyone trying to outshine each other, we're all working together toward a common objective.
Exactly. This taps into what psychologists call social rewards, those feelings of connection and appreciation we get from being part of a group.
So it's about fulfilling that need for affirmation and belonging, but in a way that's supportive and uplifting rather than competitive and stressful.
Precisely. And it's not just about feeling good, it's about creating a more productive and enjoyable work environment for everyone.
I can definitely see how that would reduce the pressure to constantly compare yourself to others. When you're all working toward a common goal, it's less about individual ego and more about collective success.
And there's some fascinating research by Adam Grant, an organizational psychologist, that supports this. He talks about the concept of givers, people who achieve success by supporting others.
What a great concept. So we can create this positive feedback loop where everyone is lifting each other up instead of tearing
Yeah.
each other down.
Exactly. Imagine a workplace where everyone is focused on helping their colleagues succeed. It not only reduces comparison, but also boosts morale and productivity. It's a win-win for everyone involved.
That sounds amazing.
Hmm.
What can managers do to foster this type of culture?
A lot of it comes down to leadership and setting the right tone. Managers can implement mentorship programs where more experienced employees guide and support newer ones. They can also recognize not just individual achievements, but also acts of collaboration and support.
So instead of just rewarding the top performer, we're recognizing and celebrating those who help their teammates succeed. That really changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It shifts the focus from individual stars to a team of all stars working together to reach their full potential.
This is so inspiring. I can already picture how much more positive and productive workplaces could be if we embrace this mindset.
It's definitely a shift, but a shift worth making. And remember, this isn't just an idealistic vision. There's research to back up the benefits of collaboration and a less comparison-driven culture.
This has been so insightful. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground already, from the brain science of comparison to practical strategies for breaking free, and even starting to think about how to create a more supportive work environment.
It's a lot to take in, but I think it's important to remember that breaking free from comparison is a journey, not a destination. It's about building a new mindset and putting these strategies into practice consistently over time.
And even if you catch yourself slipping back into old patterns, don't get discouraged. Just keep practicing, keep learning, and keep growing.
Exactly. It's a process, and we're all in this together. Comparison might be a universal experience, but so is the power of connection, support, and growth.
I love that. It's a reminder that we're not alone in this journey and that we can create a more supportive and fulfilling work world one step at a time.
And before we get too far ahead of ourselves, why don't we pause here and recap some of the key takeaways from this first part of our deep dive into the comparison trap?
That sounds like a great idea. We've covered so much ground, it's helpful to pause and take stock of what we've learned so far.
First and foremost, remember that comparing yourself to others can actually trigger a stress response in your brain, which zaps your focus and resilience.
So that feeling of inadequacy isn't just in your head, it's actually affecting your brain chemistry and making it harder to perform at your best.
Exactly. And those comparison-driven emotions like jealousy and shame can ultimately lead to burnout and disengagement. It's a recipe for unhappiness at work.
So it's not just about feeling bad in the moment, it's about the long-term impact on your mental health and your career.
Now, here's the good news. By focusing on tracking your own progress and setting those intrinsic goals we talked about, you can reduce the need for external validation.
It's about finding that internal motivation and celebrating your own wins rather than constantly looking to others for approval.
And don't underestimate the power of mindfulness and self-compassion. These practices can do wonders for your mental well-being and emotional stability, helping you navigate the inevitable ups and downs of work life.
It's like building up your inner resilience so you can handle the challenges without getting swept away by comparison.
Finally, remember that building a more collaborative culture at work can significantly reduce the urge to compare. When everyone feels supported and valued, there's less need for that cutthroat competition.
It's about creating a rising tide that lifts all boats, rather than everyone scrambling for a piece of the pie.
So, with all that said, I'd encourage you to take some time to reflect on how comparison has impacted your own work life.
Think about the times you've felt that twinge of jealousy or inadequacy, and consider how you might apply these strategies to shift your mindset.
Here are a few questions to ponder. How has comparison affected your mental well-being or job performance? What intrinsic goals can you set to track your progress independently of others? And how might you contribute to a more collaborative and less competitive culture at work?
These are such great questions. I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today.
And in the next part of our depth dive, we'll continue this conversation by exploring some additional resources and insights that can help you break free from the comparison trap and create a more fulfilling work experience.
I'm looking forward to that. Stay tuned for more on breaking free from the comparison trap in part 2.
You know, as we were diving into all these strategies to kind of tackle this comparison trap, I kept thinking about all the incredible books and research that really go into the psychology behind this whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. You know me, I'm always eager to add to my reading list. So what are some books that come to mind?
Well, one that really stands out is Brene Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection.
Oh, it's
It's a powerful reminder that those feelings of not being good enough, the vulnerability and shame, often fuel the comparison game.
Right. And she talks about this idea of wholehearted living, accepting ourselves flaws, and all instead of constantly trying to measure up to some impossible standard.
Exactly. And when you apply that to work, it's such a liberating concept. Instead of comparing yourself to that colleague who seems to have it all figured out, you can focus on your own unique strengths and contributions.
It's about recognizing that everyone has their own path and that success isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. Speaking of unique paths, I know you're also a big fan of Carol Dweck's work on mindset.
Oh, absolutely. Mindset. The New Psychology of Success is a must read. It's all about the power of a growth mindset, the belief that your abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort and learning.
Yes. And I remember that from the book. It completely changes how you approach challenges and setbacks.
And her research shows that people with a growth mindset are less likely to get caught in the comparison trap. They see their potential as always evolving a journey, not a static competition.
So instead of comparing yourself to someone who's further along in their career, you're focused on your own progress and learning, knowing that you're constantly growing and improving.
It's about embracing the process of becoming rather than striving to be the best, which can feel so much more freeing in a competitive work environment.
And it's not just about feeling better, it's about achieving more, right? A growth mindset helps you take on challenges, embrace feedback, and ultimately reach your full potential.
Exactly. You're giving yourself permission to experiment, make mistakes, and learn from those experiences without the fear of judgment or comparison holding you back. And speaking of being kind to yourself,
Yes, we have to talk more about Dr. Kristen Neff and self-compassion. We touched on it earlier, but I think it deserves more attention.
absolutely. Her book, Self Compassion: The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, is truly transformative.
hmm
Neff's research shows that self compassion is such a powerful antidote to the negative effects of comparison.
It's about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a friend who's going through a tough time.
Exactly. And it's not about letting yourself off the hook or ignoring areas where you need to grow. It's about recognizing that everyone makes mistakes. And it's how we respond to those mistakes that defines us.
It's about learning from our experiences, both the successes and the failures, and using them to move forward. Is there anything else about self-compassion that really stood out to you from her work?
One of the most fascinating things is that research shows self compassion actually promotes resilience, emotional stability, and even job satisfaction.
So it's not just some feel-good concept. There's real scientific evidence that being kind to yourself can make you a more effective and happier employee.
Exactly. Think about how much more enjoyable work would be if we all practiced a little more self compassion. We'd be less afraid to take risks, more open to feedback, and more supportive of each other.
It's like creating a more human and understanding workplace where people feel safe to be themselves and to grow.
Which is a great reminder that breaking free from the comparison trap is an ongoing journey. It's about developing this new mindset and practicing these strategies consistently over time.
It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. So even if you catch yourself slipping back into those old patterns of comparing yourself to others, don't be discouraged. Just keep practicing, keep learning, and keep growing.
You know, one of the things that struck me while we were preparing for this deep dive was how universal this whole experience is. Comparison affects almost everyone, regardless of what they do or where they work.
It's like this invisible thread that connects us all. This desire to feel valued and successful. It's a shared human experience. But in a world, especially a work world that often feels hyper-competitive, it's easy to get caught in the comparison trap.
And that's why it's so important to remember that true success isn't about being better than someone else. It's about being the best version of yourself.
And that's a journey that's unique to each individual. It's about finding your own strengths, following your passions, and defining success on your own terms.
It's about recognizing that we all have something special to offer and that comparison only diminishes those unique contributions.
I love that. When we shift our focus from competition to collaboration, from envy to inspiration, that's when we unlock our true potential, both as individuals and as a team.
It's about creating a workplace culture where everyone feels supported, valued, and empowered to reach their full potential.
That's a vision worth striving for, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a reminder that work doesn't have to be a constant struggle or a soul-crushing grind. It can be a place where we learn, grow, and support each other's journey.
Before we move on to part 3, do you have any final thoughts or advice for our listeners as they navigate this whole idea of comparison in their own work lives?
You know, I think it all comes back to self-awareness. Pay attention to those moments when you feel that urge to compare yourself to someone else. Notice the thoughts and feelings that come up and then consciously choose to shift your focus.
So it's about catching yourself in the act, so to speak, and then making
Yeah.
a deliberate choice to reframe your perspective.
Exactly. And remember, it's a practice not about being perfect. You're not going to eliminate comparison completely, but you can learn to manage it more effectively.
It's about strengthening those mental muscles, practicing self-compassion, embracing a growth mindset, and focusing on your own unique path.
And as you do that, you'll find that work becomes less about proving yourself and more about fulfilling your potential.
What a great reminder. We're all works in progress. And that's something to celebrate, not something to compare.
And when we can embrace that spirit of growth and self acceptance, we truly break free from the comparison trap and create a more positive and fulfilling work experience for ourselves and for those around us.
That's a perfect note to transition to the final part of our deep dive. It's interesting as we've been exploring this comparison trap. I've been thinking about how much the world of work has changed, even in just the last few years,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The rise of social media, remote work, the gig economy,
Right.
it's a whole new landscape.
Yeah.
And it definitely impacts how we experience comparison.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with images of perfect lives and successful careers, ideal workspaces. It's comparison on overdrive.
And that's where all the strategies we've been discussing become even more critical.
Right.
It's about being really intentional about what you consume online, who you follow, and how you define success for yourself.
It's like creating a mental filter to protect yourself from that constant stream of comparison triggers.
Exactly. And it's not about shutting yourself off from the world or pretending those things don't exist. It's about being mindful of their impact on your well being and making conscious choices to focus on what truly matters to you.
So instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media and comparing yourself to everyone else's highlight reel, you might choose to spend that time connecting with people who inspire you in a positive way, or doing things that bring you joy and fulfillment.
Precisely. It's about reclaiming your time and energy and directing it towards things that align with your values and goals.
Yeah, and I think this is especially important for those of us who work in fields that are inherently competitive, like sales or finance or in environments where there's constant pressure to climb the corporate ladder.
Absolutely. In those situations, it's easy to get caught in that zero-sum game mentality where you feel like someone else's success means you failed.
Right.
But the truth is, there's room for everyone to succeed. And someone else's accomplishments don't diminish your own.
That's so true.
It's about shifting from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, recognizing that there are many paths to success and that we can achieve our goals without tearing each other down.
And I think that's a powerful message to carry with us, not just in our work lives, but in our personal lives as well.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, it makes me think about the future of work and how we can create a more supportive and fulfilling experience for everyone.
I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I think it starts with recognizing the inherent value of each individual, regardless of their job title or position.
I love that. It's about moving away from those rigid hierarchical structures that often breed comparison and competition, and instead fostering a more collaborative and equitable approach.
Exactly. And creating a culture where people feel safe to be themselves, to share their ideas, and to support each other's growth.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about building a sense of community and belonging where everyone feels valued and respected.
And I think technology can play a role in this too. Imagine platforms that connect people based on shared interests and skills rather than their job titles or social status.
That's a fantastic idea. It would break down those silos that often limit our perspectives and allow people to collaborate and learn from each other across industries and disciplines.
And imagine workplaces that prioritize well-being and personal growth, offering resources and support for mental health, mindfulness, and self-compassion.
It's about creating an environment where people feel encouraged to bring their whole selves to work without the fear of judgment or comparison.
And I think it's also about redefining success. Instead of measuring it solely by external factors like salary or job title, we need to start valuing things like purpose, meaning, and contribution.
It's about recognizing that true success comes from living a life aligned with your values and making a positive impact on the world around you.
And I believe that's a vision worth striving for both individually and collectively.
I couldn't agree more. This has been such an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation. It feels like we've covered so much ground from the science of comparison to envisioning a better future for work.
And I truly hope our listeners feel empowered to take these ideas and apply them to their own lives.
Remember, comparison might be a natural human tendency, but it doesn't have to control our lives.
By understanding how it works and using these practical strategies, we can break free from the trap and create a more fulfilling and joyful experience both at work and beyond.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with this final thought.
Instead of comparing yourself to others, focus on becoming the best version of yourself.
And remember, the world needs your unique talents and contributions. So go out there and shine.
That's a fantastic way to end this episode. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic, so stay tuned.
Thank you for joining. This is the Practical World Podcast.